to our webinar. My name is Raina, and I'm on the marketing team here at BigPanda. Today, we're putting a spotlight on the topic of ITOps reporting and how the process today is mostly broken. I'm here today with my colleague and ITOps veteran, Mohan Kampella. Mohan is the Senior Director of Product at BigPanda today. He will discuss 1, 4 reasons why ITOps reporting is broken, 2, the ITOps reporting challenges for IT execs, NOC managers, and service owners, and 3, why BigPanda Unified Analytics can help. I'd like to encourage you to share your thoughts with us on social media by tweeting or posting with the hashtag BigPandaWebinars. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mohan. Mohan?
Yeah, thank you, Reina. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, based on your time zone. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar. As Reina said, this is being recorded, and we will be sharing that with you. Definitely want to make it interactive or to the extent possible, so please use the GoToWebinar control panel to send us your questions throughout the webinar. We'll try to get through as many of the questions as possible during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. If we can't, we'll certainly get back to you afterwards. So thanks again for joining. So as we get started, a quick intro for myself. So I have been in IT ops at this point for about 20 years, and I've had a number of different roles within IT ops. I used to be a consultant deploying IT ops solutions for mid to large enterprises, mostly on the East Coast in the US for a few years. Then I was a sales engineer for a few more years before I moved into technical and product marketing. And that's how I ended up at BigPanda, being in the product organization. So very familiar with the typical challenges that organizations have in terms of IT ops, and also with IT ops reporting. I've actually myself used a number of different products, both generic reporting tools as well as off-the-shelf IT ops reporting tools. So I'm also familiar with the pros and the cons of these different approaches. So hopefully for the next 25 to 30 minutes, I can share some of those things with you, and then we can also talk about if BigPanda Unified Analytics can actually help you in your own environment. So specifically, in terms of the agenda, we're going to talk about a little bit about the challenge for IT ops, the 4 reasons why IT ops reporting is unfortunately broken, and the problems, the problem this creates for IT execs, NOC managers, and service owners, and finally how Unified Analytics from BigPanda can help. So, like I said a couple of minutes ago, we'll also have questions at the end. So please feel free to add your questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so let's start with the challenge for IT ops. Broadly, if you look at the world of IT over the last 5 to 7 years, infrastructure and software have dramatically transformed. If you actually have an architect, from let's say 2000, and you show them the current IT architecture stack, I would be willing to bet that they would have a tough time, because just understanding all the different ways in which infrastructure is completely transformed and software is transformed as well. But the one thing that would be familiar to someone like that is the fact that the world of IT ops has not actually transformed all that much. It's still pretty manual, it's slow and difficult to scale. And what we see is, this chart, this diagram chart in front of you, this is largely indicative of how the world of IT ops looks today. Even within our own customer base, our customers have anywhere from 20 to 30 to 50 different tools that are collecting monitoring data and alert data and other types of data, and then bubbling that up into the L1s, who then escalate a lot of the incidents that they see to the L2s and L3s. There's obviously ticketing and collaboration tools in the mix, notification tools in the mix. But net, it's a very chaotic, manual, and stressful scenario that plays out on an everyday basis within NOCs and within IT ops teams. So what this means is that for an IT exec, if you have, for an IT exec, for a NOC manager or a NOC director, and a service owner that sits outside of IT ops, but who's really a customer for the IT ops or the NOC team, it's very hard to answer some very fundamental questions. So, for example, how are my metrics trending? How does my MTTX look? Uh, excuse me, which could mean my MTTR, my MTTD, my MTTA. What are my ticket creation rates? How many of my incidents result in tickets, and what are the severities there, for example. The second question is, what are my problem areas? What are my top N offenders? What are my recurring hotspots? And then, very importantly, how are my services and applications doing in terms of uptime, SLAs, downtime, performance degradation, so on and so forth. And last but not the least, and this is, I think, very relevant if you're a NOC manager or a NOC director, how is my team doing? How productive are they? What is the resolution rate that I typically see in my NOC? Or let's say you run or manage a set of global NOCs, then obviously you want to understand and benchmark and compare the productivity and the performance of the 2, 3, 4 NOCs that you have. And even if you manage a single NOC, you also want to see, for example, from a shift to shift basis, how is my productivity, how is my resolution, or how is my escalation rate? How quickly does someone in my NOC in the second shift, for example, acknowledge a P1 issue? If I have a P0 or P0 outage, how quickly am I able to detect it? How quickly am I able to, resolve it, so on and so forth? So, and needless to say, there's other questions out there, but I think broadly these are the 4 questions that IT execs, NOC managers, and service owners want to know the answers to. But unfortunately, answering these, what I think are, really fundamental, foundational, and simple questions is extremely hard today. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and talk about why it's hard. So broadly, we've seen at BigPanda with our own customers, there are 4 reasons why answering these questions is hard. The first one is there are actually no metrics. And what do we mean by that? So many customers, many enterprises have actually learned to live without them. And when I say that, I think the nuance there is that they do have, very, very rudimentary metrics, but these are just, ticket volumes or incident volumes, things like that, but nothing really beyond that. So they've learned to live without these metrics. And obviously the problem is that, as you can imagine, if you really can't measure all of the right IT ops KPIs, then how are you going to be able to improve them? And I think this is actually a pretty big gap. From time to time, I actually get involved in uh, BVA discussions, business value assessment discussions. And one of the things we ask is, prospects and customers, one of the things we ask is, what kind of benchmark data do they have, for MTTR, MTTD, MTTA? We also ask them, what are some common productivity metrics for their L1s, L2s, and L3s? And in many, many cases, prospects just don't have that kind of a data, and this applies to both uh, highly sophisticated organizations that have been trying to do this for a while. It also applies to customers that are mid to large and actually really growing aggressively and want to have these metrics, but they just can't get to them. So that's the first issue. The second problem that we have, and some prospects or customers would actually say this is actually worse than having no metrics, and this is just having bad metrics. So what do we mean by that? To make it very concrete, let's look at MTTR, which I think anyone in the world of IT ops is intimately familiar with. So broadly, we see that there's three approaches to measuring MTTR. Uh, we have some enterprises that wait for customers or users to contact them and report that there is an outage or a problem or some kind of performance degradation, and that's when the MTTR clock starts ticking. Others actually wait for someone to call in and have a ticket be created, and the ticket creation time kicks off the MTTR clock. The third approach that we see is customers do have some kind of instrumentation, but they decide to start the clock when they actually detect the problem using that instrumentation. So the problem with this wide range of approaches is how are you going to consistently measure MTTR, improve MTTR, and communicate the value that your NOC or IT ops team is creating in reducing this critical metric. Obviously, it's just one metric. There's any number of other metrics based on your organization, your responsibilities and roles that you're interested in. So net net, when you don't have the right industry standard way to measure one of these metrics, it creates a lot of issues in terms of optimizing it, improving it, and communicating it over time. The third problem that we see is just bad data. So what do we mean by bad data? So I think over the last, not just the last 5 years, but I would say over the last 20, 25 years, as anyone in the world of IT ops knows, there's tens, if not hundreds, of monitoring tools out there that generate monitoring data and IT alerts in any number of formats. So when this data comes in, for the most part, it's not clean, it's not normalized, it's not enriched, it's not correlated. And what we see with prospects is that when this data is then pulled in and archived or stored in some kind of database, and then you analyze that, the results that you get out of that also reflect, I think, the fact that the data itself is not clean or enriched or good enough. So this is again a major issue because what that means is so for example, let's say you're a retailer and you really don't have all of the right enrichment data that shows which critical service is being affected on a periodic basis, or which location, which store, which geo, for example, consistently has problems, etc. So if you don't have that enrichment data that shows you that, when you run reports, it's very hard for you to basically do any kind of stack ranking. It's very hard for you to identify areas or applications or services that have recurring issues. And because of that, it again impedes any kind of initiatives of efforts that you undertake to drive a bunch of across the board improvements there. I think this is a particularly bad problem for enterprises because a lot of times they will put in all of the right reporting infrastructure. They probably have a really powerful, BI tool, or maybe they've spent, 9 months with a team of engineers building a custom reporting solution. But then the data that's being fed into the reporting solution is bad or not clean enough, which then degrades the usefulness of the results that you get out of it. So that's the third problem that we see. And the fourth problem that we see is again, what I would call broadly, bad tools. This day and age, a pretty large number of enterprises out there continue to use spreadsheets, manually built, manually updated spreadsheets to do their reporting, or they use a general purpose, reporting tool. So from a few years ago, when I was still active in the field from a hands-on perspective, I remember, the scramble that used to happen within the NOC or within an IT ops team at the end of each week to manually pull in all the data into a spreadsheet, do a number of things to, hopefully cleanse it a little bit, generate the reports, and then Monday morning send those out to the VP of IT ops, or maybe some kind of a service owner that sat outside the IT ops team. Similarly, I also recall the customers using tools like Crystal Reports, or BERT slash Eclipse, which I think was an open source reporting tool, and any number of other really general purpose reporting tools. So to be clear, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that approach, but I do think that that's a pretty inefficient way to do it, because what that means is, A, all of the data that's captured, in these manual spreadsheets or these general purpose reporting tools, has to be, in many cases, hand entered or basically imported from other sources manually, which introduces the uh, potential for errors and problems to creep in. It also means that often it's not your L1s, but maybe a NOC manager, or maybe someone who's an L3 engineer or a domain expert has to spend anywhere between half a day to a full day making sure that the data is all entered, that they're actually processing or analyzing it the right way, and then creating easy to understand, digestible reports for execs and other stakeholders. So I think there's a lot of effort, it's a lot of recurring manual effort that needs to be put in, which could easily have been used for something much more productive. When you go to the general purpose reporting tools, I think the scenario is slightly better, because I think some of the data entry, data processing, visualizations more automated, but at the same time, it also means that all of the critical IT ops KPIs that you should be tracking have to be manually created in there by you. And then if someone asks you to change how you're analyzing a certain data set, or maybe creating a new visualization, that's again a lot of manual upkeep. So this again, I think, sucks up a lot of time from some very important people in the IT ops org structure, which could have been used more beneficially elsewhere. So uh, the if you kind of synthesize the four problems that we just discussed, I think what happens is, because organizations are not able to easily and properly analyze and report on IT ops, it creates three systemic problems. So one, I think it increases the operational costs to the entire organization. It also impedes and prevents you from improving the performance and the availability across your applications and services. And finally, if you are like, pretty much every other company out there today, constantly introducing new digital initiatives and applications and services, then it definitely adds an element of risk to these new initiatives and to your digital transformation process. Uh, so given that, with BigPanda Unified Analytics, we actually see that our customers are able to use it to solve all of these challenges. Uh, so the way BigPanda Unified Analytics works is, this basically ingests all of the data from all of your monitoring tools, data from change, topology, CSV files, inventory databases, and so on and so forth. And then you can use Unified Analytics to report across all your sources. We offer a number of pre-built reports, and we also give you the flexibility to do custom reporting. A lot of the pre-built reports, and I believe there's more than 100 modules that are ready to use, but these cover all the typical IT ops KPIs that you would need. It also works with the tools that you have. So what we mean by that is, while we take care of the data analysis and processing, if you already standardized on, let's say, Tableau, for example, or you standardized on some other BI product, or maybe there's a custom reporting solution, then we can also make sure that we integrate with those tools, and you can use that as the visualization layer. And last but not the least, We also have the ability to give you benchmarking data across across the organization. So, for example, if you said, "How does my L1 resolution rate compare to what other modern enterprises are doing?" So we can actually offer you that benchmarking data as a way to help you understand where you are and then drive a bunch of improvement initiatives going forward. So, so how from a use case standpoint, how do our customers use unified analytics? So we can do team performance tracking for both IT ops and NOC teams. If in many cases, and what we see is the L1 function has been outsourced to a third-party vendor. If that is the case, then you can use BigPanda Unified Analytics to hold those teams accountable. You can obviously track the availability and performance for your critical applications and services and improve them. You can also use it for incident and problem management, as well as any kind of post-mortem analysis process that you have in place. From a financial standpoint, there's obviously a lot of benchmarking data that talks about the cost per incident, the cost per ticket, et cetera, et cetera. At a simple layer, obviously there's more financial data available based on the organization. We can actually marry that into the BigPanda system and actually show you some pretty interesting financial data that talks about the cost of outages, the cost of performance, the cost of non-performance, and so on and so forth. And finally, every IT ops team and organization out there has both internal and external SLAs that they're held accountable for. So we can also, on a very routine basis, we also help you do SLA reporting and analysis. So why, in this world of IT ops reporting and the many options that are out there, both good and bad, why would someone use BigPanda Unified Analytics? A, it's purpose built for IT ops. B, it's based on best practices and it's based on our deep real world IT ops expertise. And finally, it's very expressly designed for IT execs, NOC managers, and service owners. So we think that because of these three reasons, that this actually becomes a very easy to use, easy to understand, and easy to adopt IT ops reporting and analysis platform. Okay, so now that's all great, but when we talk about the reports, let's actually see some examples of what these reports look like, based on what we've done for a number of enterprises. So the first question we asked before was, how are my metrics trending? So in this case, this is an example of a metrics overview dashboard that talks about, as you can see, everything from alerts by source, based on the tools that you use. We can talk about the tickets to incidents to alerts ratios, which gives you a pretty good idea of how efficient your incident management process is. It can also show you over time how your incidents and alerts and events and alerts and incidents trend, talk about ticket creation rates and so on and so forth. We can also talk, when we now switching gears a little bit, when we talk about these critical metrics that you have, like MTTD, mean time to detect, or MTTR, mean time to resolution. We can also show you what those trends look like. We can both give you snapshots over time, and that could be a quarter, it could be a month, it could be a week, whatever granularity that you're looking for. It's fairly easy to give you that kind of visibility. And we have customers that have used reports very similar to this to drive down, for example, MTTR from most recently at a large ERP vendor, drive it down from 12 hours to 7 hours. And the reason they were able to do that is because A, they benchmarked what their MTTR was, then they drilled down with the reporting and that identified this specific stages of their incident management pipeline that was really making their MTTR long. And then over the next 3 to 6 months, they were able to drive a number of improvements in that stage specifically, which then ended up reducing their MTTR from 12 hours, I think, to about 7 hours, which was phenomenal. But obviously, the job's not done, and they continue to work on other initiatives to reduce it further. The another type of chart or dashboard that we can look at is, what are my problem areas? How are my, critical services doing? What are the top offending services, or what are the top problem areas? So we can also look at that from a service standpoint, which you see here. We can look at that from a host standpoint. We can also look at that from an application standpoint. So there's a lot of flexibility there in terms of how you want to visualize that. Uh, and the final one we have here is, and this for me is a personal favorite, having worked alongside L1s and L2s and L3s and NOCs for many years, which is understanding the performance of different teams, different individuals, and different NOCs based on what you're responsible for. So one example I can think of is we had a customer where a specific NOC engineer was 2 to 3 times more productive in terms of being able to resolve issues. And obviously, there was a lot of interest in understanding why this specific engineer was much more productive. And they found out that he basically had created a almost like a playbook for how he would resolve issues. And the NOC manager was then able to take that and then disseminate that to the rest of the team to drive a bunch of efficiencies. We also had a situation where a certain team was much more productive than the rest of the NOC team. And in that case, it turned out that the specific application that they were responsible for would continuously spit out the same type of problem over and over and over again. And this team had gotten really good at solving that one specific issue, which was great from a productivity standpoint. But I think the underlying issue was deeper, and obviously using the reporting, they were able to figure out that the specific application had a problem. They were able to go in and actually fix it, and thereby basically save many, many hours for the NOC team on a weekly basis. So anyway, those are just pretty simple examples, but there's a lot of flexibility in here to be able to slice and dice the team performance data to get you the insights that you need. So in summary, with Unified Analytics from BigPanda, IT orgs can see a full, clear picture of IT ops performance. If you're an IT exec, if you're a NOC manager, or if you're a service owner, you can use this data and these insights to drive very tangible improvements in IT ops performance. And finally, if you're an IT exec or if you're a CIO, then you can also use these insights to guarantee that when you launch a brand new service, when you launch a brand new application, that you can do everything you can to make it successful over the long term. So that is basically the meat of the webinar. So I see that we're at 10:29 Pacific time. I'm happy to take any questions. Reena, if you have anything coming in, please let me know.
Yeah, so thanks, Mohan. It looks like some of our attendees do have a couple of questions here. So one of them is, what else does BigPanda do beyond IT ops reporting?
So BigPanda is meant to really help you automate the entire incident management process. So what we see is, customers have anywhere from 20 to 30 to 50 monitoring tools, and they're literally drowning in IT alert data. So many of them end up not really getting the full ROI from the tools that they invest in, to the point that they actually turn off some of these tools because they're just too noisy. But what that means is that when there's an outage, then they either can't prevent the outage from happening, or they can minimize the duration of these outages. So with BigPanda, we are able to ingest all of the alert data from all of your tools. We use our open box machine learning to correlate this data, and then we surface a handful of incidents. So we reduce your alert noise. We help you identify problems and outages quickly, and then help you obviously prevent them. And then all of that, that's obviously done in a real-time basis. And then the unified analytics piece picks up after the real-time piece is done, and you would then use all of the data to do the longer-term reporting.
Great. Okay. I do have another question here. So this person's asking, do I have to use the BigPanda reporting UI? We've already actually settled on another popular BI tool. Does BigPanda work with that?
Yeah, it does. It does. So we have integrated the BigPanda Unified Analytics backend, if you will, with other popular BI tools out there. So I'm fairly confident that we can, work with pretty much most enterprise tools. Happy to share more details if we know what that specific tool is.
Okay, great. Another question about reporting here is how long can I keep this data and where can I keep it?
So that's a great question. Uh, so obviously the duration for how long you would keep the data really comes down to a function of their disk storage or the amount of storage that you have available. So we're pretty flexible on that. Typically, just in the world of IT ops, from a granular standpoint, most customers want to have 6 months of data. There are some customers that prefer to have a year's worth of data. So that's what we typically see, and that's what we typically support. Beyond, I would say, a year or beyond a year and a half, uh, we don't really see a lot of customers, looking at the data or actually using that data. But then if you go beyond, let's say 18 months, then I think we would have to work with you on a custom solution. So that's one. And then two, where's the data kept? So today we actually keep the data on the BigPanda instance. But I think there's some options there as well if you wanted to kind of own your data, or if you wanted to download it for some kind of archival purposes.
Okay, great. Do you have a time to answer one more question, Mohan?
Yes.
So I have another question here. Can this be an on-premise, cloud, or both options?
No, so BigPanda itself is actually a SaaS native platform, so we are in the cloud. So at this time, we're not on-prem, unfortunately.
All right. Well, those are all the, actually, I apologize. There is also another question here, if you have time, Mohan.
Sure.
What kind of plugins do you have to the common cloud vendors, such as AWS, GCP, Azure, etc.?
So I'm not 100% sure if that's specific to unified analytics or if it's more of a general, BigPanda question. Um, so I can tell you that we do work with. Let me rephrase it. So our customers actually are in multiple cloud environments, and I know that we've successfully imported data from any kind of tools or environments or the infrastructure that's in all of these different popular cloud platforms. So I think we'd have to understand a little bit more in terms of what you mean. Do you have specific tools on these cloud platforms that you want us to integrate with? Or are you really asking like which cloud platform do we support? So not sure, but maybe we can answer that offline.
All right, wonderful. And then I think this is also a general question. This is a final question here, Mohan, since I know we're over time, in regards to BigPanda. So the question is, are there specific hardware requirements, or does BigPanda ride over the top? And again, I'm reading verbatim here from the question.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So now, because we're a SaaS native platform, you actually don't have to bring in any hardware of any kind. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're also able to provision an instance of BigPanda pretty quickly. That's also another reason why most of our customers go live with BigPanda. In 99% of the cases, they go live with BigPanda in under 3 months. Or maybe I should just say 100% because I don't think it's 99 either. But yeah, so coming back, yeah, there's nothing, no hardware to provision, no hardware to procure. Yeah, customers really don't have to bring in anything from their side.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Mohan. And I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up because I think we're over time. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. For some of you that we weren't able to answer some questions, we'll go ahead and reach out to you individually. So to help you share with today's learnings and revisit them, we'll send you 3 things via email by tomorrow. So please be on the lookout for this email. We'll send you a copy of today's deck, the webinar recording, as well as a copy of the Unified Analytics white paper. All right, so with that, thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.